world of speculation, the difference between fortune and ruin is rarely decided by intelligence alone. Many clever men have walked onto the trading floor, armed with theories, formulas, and bold convictions, only to be carried out when the tide turned against them. What separated the rare survivors from the countless failures was not brilliance, nor charm, nor even knowledge of the market's inner workings. It was discipline. Markets have always rewarded patience and punished recklessness, and those who forget this law sooner or later pay dearly. The market does not care how certain you feel, how much you have studied, or how many times you have been right before. The market cares only for the size of your position, the limits of your capital, and the strength of your discipline when everything begins to move against you. Discipline begins with an understanding of survival. Too many traders believe their job is to win every trade. They imagine that success comes from a flawless record of predictions, that their reputation or their self-image will collapse if they admit defeat even once. But the disciplined operator knows that losses are not only inevitable, they are necessary. They are the price of admission for staying in the game. What matters is not whether you lose, but how much you lose. The market will never ask you to be perfect, but it will demand that you protect your stake without capital. Even the most gifted market reader is reduced to nothing more than a spectator, watching opportunities pass like ships in the night, unable to board. The reckless man sizes his position according to his excitement. He sees an opportunity and throws himself into it with everything he has, convinced that conviction is enough. The disciplined man sizes his position according to his capital. He understands that even the clearest signal can be wrong, that even the strongest trend can reverse without warning, and that the market is larger than any single opinion. He does not need to prove himself right in one trade. He needs only to remain in the game long enough for his judgment to show its worth over many trades. There is a cruelty in markets that only the disciplined survive to appreciate. A single misstep can undo years of steady accumulation. One oversized trade, taken in a moment of confidence or desperation, can strip a trader of his entire fortune. It is not the losing trade that kills. It is the lack of control. Discipline means refusing to expose yourself to destruction, no matter how sweet the promise of gain may appear. Discipline means remembering that the goal is not this trade, nor even the next one, but the next 100. Every speculator faces temptation. The ticker begins to print numbers that look like gold. The news begins to swell with optimism. Friends speak with certainty, and inside the trader's chest grows the old fever. The feeling that this is the chance, this is the one, this cannot miss. The undisciplined man surrenders to this fever. He abandons his formula, doubles his size, and pushes every coin forward. For a while, the market may indulge him. Sometimes fortune favors recklessness long enough to breed confidence. But when the turn comes, and it always comes, it wipes out not just his profits, but his future. The disciplined trader faces the same fever, but he answers it differently. He remembers that no single trade is necessary. He reminds himself that the market will always be there tomorrow, offering new opportunities. He resists the urge to bet so large that his very survival depends on being right. By doing so, he creates a position not only in the market but against the market's cruelty itself. He is prepared to withstand the unexpected. He may lose, but he will never be destroyed. Discipline is not glamorous. It rarely feels heroic to cut a loss small, to pass on a trade that seems obvious, or to keep your position size modest when others are shouting about fortune. It feels like restraint, like holding back when your instincts scream to leap. But over time, restraint proves itself to be the greatest weapon a trader can carry. The market pays only those who can last. It does not pay those who burn bright and vanish. Discipline also means refusing to measure success by the standards of the crowd. In any marketplace, there will always be stories of sudden riches. A neighbor claims to have doubled his account in a week. A colleague boasts of catching the exact bottom and selling at the exact top. These tales, half true and half lies, are intoxicating. They whisper to the trader that he too should gamble, that he too should throw aside restraint in pursuit of the big win. But discipline means ignoring the noise. The disciplined trader knows that for every man boasting of sudden riches, 10 others sit silent in ruin. Their pride is broken as their accounts. Discipline is not measured in moments of triumph, but in years of survival capital preserved through discipline becomes the foundation of compounding gains. Small, steady victories protected by strict control of size and risk accumulate into large fortunes. Meanwhile, the undisciplined chase sudden wealth and just as suddenly lose it. The irony is cruel but consistent. The disciplined man, who aims only to survive, often becomes the one who prospers most, while the reckless man, who aims to prosper quickly, often cannot even survive. There is a paradox in trading that only discipline resolves. To make great profits, one must be willing to risk. Yet to risk without restraint is to invite certain ruin. Discipline resolves this paradox by controlling not the desire for profit, but the exposure to loss. It recognizes that the trader's true enemy is not the market, but himself, his greed, his fear, his impatience. A disciplined man builds rules to protect himself from himself, and he obeys them even when every nerve strains against obedience. Time exposes the truth of discipline. The undisciplined trader may shine briefly, dazzling those around him with stories of windfall gains. But time erodes his advantage, because sooner or later he encounters the inevitable losing streak, and his lack of restraint leaves him defenseless. The disciplined trader may appear slower, more cautious, even timid in comparison. But with time, he outlasts them all. His fortune grows not from brilliance, but from the quiet consistency of refusing to gamble his survival on a single throw of the dice. The essence of speculation is patience and survival. The market is infinite, but your capital is not. To protect it, to preserve it, to refuse to expose it recklessly, is the highest form of discipline. This discipline may not win you admiration in the short run. It may not give you stories to boast about at dinner tables, but it will give you the one thing the market never grants lightly: the ability to stay alive, to fight another day, and to let your edge reveal itself across the endless stream of opportunities. The market will always provide. Speculation is a business of balance, though few ever treat it as such. The reckless believe the game is about daring, about putting everything on the line when conviction burns hot. The timid, on the other hand, imagine they can creep their way to fortune by risking crumbs, convinced that even the smallest gain is progress. Both paths lead to disappointment, though in different ways. The reckless perish quickly, and the timid simply grind their accounts into dust over years, never allowing themselves to capture what the market occasionally offers. The truth known only to those who last lies in finding that difficult middle ground, positions sized small enough to protect survival, yet large enough to matter when fortune proves them right. The market has no mercy for extremes. The man who wagers his entire fortune on a single trade will one day see the other side of the coin, and that day will end his career. No matter how sharp his analysis or how brilliant his timing, one blow too large will be enough to erase years of discipline in an instant. He forgets that no edge is absolute, no certainty beyond doubt. Even the strongest patterns can fail, and even the most convincing setups can collapse without warning. To size recklessly is to invite annihilation. Survival demands restraint. But restraint alone is not enough. The trader who risks too little may pride himself on safety, but in truth he wastes his time. A position so small that it cannot affect his fortune, even if successful, is no position at all. It is a token gesture, a wager meant only to soothe his mind rather than build his wealth. When correct, he gains pennies. When wrong, he may lose those pennies too, and in the end the ledger hardly moves. This kind of trading becomes a cycle of frustration, hours of effort, months of activity, and nothing to show. The market rewards boldness tempered by control, not endless caution that produces nothing but wasted opportunities. Finding the balance requires brutal honesty. The trader must look at his capital and ask, how much can I afford to lose on this idea without compromising my ability to fight another day? He must also ask, if I am right, will this position yield enough to justify the risk? If the answer to either question is no, the position is flawed. too large, and the loss will cripple him. Too small, and the gain will not matter. The correct size is that narrow space between fragility and futility. This balance cannot be measured only in numbers, though numbers are part of it. Formulas can help. The fraction of capital at risk per trade, the percentage of equity committed. But behind the numbers lies temperament. The timid man, even with a formula, will still cut his size down to nothing when fear grips him. The reckless man, even after losses, will still push his entire fortune onto a single bet when greed returns. The disciplined operator not only calculates the proper size, he also obeys it, even when every instinct screams otherwise. His discipline is his shield, his rules, his fortress. Consider the psychology of being large enough to matter. When the trade begins to move in his favor, the disciplined trader feels the reward in real terms. The gains accumulate meaningfully, not as trifles. He does not mock himself with profits so small they feel like wasted time. He knows that if he is right, the effort will show in his account. Yet he also knows that if he is wrong, the damage will not strike at his survival. He accepts the loss calmly because it is no more than a cost of doing business. Meanwhile, the man who bets too small is plagued by regret. When he is right, he berates himself for not having risked more. The gains feel hollow, almost mocking, as if the market is teasing him with what could have been. When he is wrong, the loss may be small, but so is the potential. Over time, this pattern corrodes his confidence. He becomes hesitant, second-guessing, always wondering if his efforts are worth anything at all. His problem is not his ability to read the market, but his refusal to risk enough to make his ideas count. On the other side, the man who bets too large lives in constant terror. He may boast loudly when fortune favors him, but beneath the bravado lies fear. Every tick against him feels like doom. He checks the tape obsessively, heart pounding, stomach clenched, unable to think of anything but the fate of his oversized wager. This is not trading. It is gambling with survival as the stake. When the market inevitably turns, his fear becomes reality, and his career ends in a flash of ruin. Balance is the only path, small enough to survive, large enough to matter. This principle applies not only to single trades, but to the entire career of a speculator. It is the way to turn a series of modest risks into an enduring fortune. Each position is a step, measured and cautious, yet meaningful in its potential reward. Over time, the accumulation of such steps builds wealth in a manner that is steady and sustainable. Patience plays a central role in this formula. The trader must wait for the right moment, for the setups that justify committing meaningful capital. He cannot scatter his resources across every flicker in the tape, hoping that 1,000 tiny wagers will yield riches. Nor can he hurl himself into every passing rally with reckless size. He must wait, watch, and select only those opportunities worthy of risking enough to matter, while never forgetting the necessity of protecting survival. The history of markets is littered with men who misunderstood this balance. Some grew too cautious, preserving their capital so fiercely that they never allowed it to grow. They died wealthy enough to survive, but too timid to prosper. Others chased fortune with reckless wagers, enjoying brief moments of glory before disappearing in silence when their oversized bets collapsed. The survivors, the few who lasted decades rather than months, were those who understood the delicate equilibrium. It is not easy. The balance shifts with the size of one's capital, with the conditions of the market, and with the state of one's own mind. A man who risks 2% of his stake when small may find that number too large, when his fortune has grown tenfold. A trade that seemed modest in quiet markets may become reckless in volatile ones. Discipline demands constant recalibration, a willingness to adjust size while never abandoning the principle itself. Ultimately, the formula is not about mathematics, but about respect, for risk, for survival, and for the market's power. To trade small enough to survive is to admit humility, to recognize that no one is bigger than the market. To trade large enough to matter is to honor opportunity, to refuse to waste the rare moments when conditions align in your favor. Both are necessary. Without the first, you will not last. Without the second, you will not prosper. The great mistake of most traders is believing that success lies at one extreme or the other. They want either complete safety or reckless gain. But the truth, known only to the disciplined, is that success lies between. It is the art of trading in such a way that each loss is endurable and each gain meaningful, that no single outcome can destroy you, but each victory moves you forward in real terms. It is not the loud path, nor the easy one. It is quiet, deliberate, and often unnoticed, but it is the only path that leads to survival and to fortune together. In the same hand, every man who has ever speculated for a living eventually discovers that capital is not merely money. It is breath. It is blood. It is the single resource that determines whether he may continue to fight or whether he is forced to surrender. A general without ammunition may have the finest strategy in the world, but he is doomed before the first shot is fired. A trader without capital is no different. His ideas, his knowledge, his instincts, all of them are useless if he has nothing left to commit. Capital is the ammunition of speculation, and guarding it as carefully as life itself is the first commandment of survival. The undisciplined man treats capital as if it were infinite. He imagines that fortune will always provide more. A loss is nothing, he tells himself, for there will be another chance to earn it back. This illusion blinds him to the truth. Once gone, capital rarely returns. The market does not grant second chances lightly, and when a man finds himself stripped of his stake, he also finds himself stripped of his freedom. He must watch from the sidelines, powerless to act, begging for another opportunity to re-enter the arena. In those moments he realizes what he should have known all along, that capital is life, and to waste it is to waste existence itself. Guarding capital requires humility. A speculator must admit that he cannot control the market, that even his sharpest judgments can prove false. He must size his positions with the assumption that he could be wrong, because one day he will be wrong. To commit too much is to risk his survival on a single opinion, and no opinion is worth such a price. Guarding capital means planning for defeat, even while striving for victory. It means preserving enough resources to fight again tomorrow, no matter what happens today. Consider the difference between two men. The first treats capital as expendable. He throws himself at every trade with reckless abandon, convinced that aggression is the path to riches. For a while he may enjoy success. A string of wins fuels his confidence, and soon he begins to believe that losses are for other men, not for him. Then, without warning, the market turns. A sudden collapse, a swift reversal, a storm he did not foresee. His oversized positions devour his account in a matter of hours. He is finished. The second man approaches capital like a soldier guarding his last cartridges. He knows that each bullet may mean the difference between survival and death. He fires only when the target is worth the shot, and never in such volume that he risks being left defenseless. When the storm comes, he absorbs the blow. He loses. Yes, but not everything. He retreats, regroups, and waits for the next opportunity. His capital remains intact, his ammunition preserved, and with it his future. Guarding capital is not cowardice. It is strategy. Too many mistake preservation for timidity, imagining that only the bold win fortunes. But fortune does not favor the man who risks annihilation. Fortune favors the one who lasts long enough to meet her again and again. To last requires capital, and to preserve capital requires discipline. The battlefield of markets is littered with the corpses of brilliant men who forgot this truth. They won great victories, but they did not guard their ammunition. And so in the end they fell. There is also a psychological dimension to capital as ammunition. A trader who allows his capital to dwindle too far loses more than money. He loses clarity. Fear seeps into every decision. Every trade feels like a final gamble. Every fluctuation a potential death sentence. He begins to act not from reason but from desperation. He clings to losing positions, hoping for a miracle. He exits winning trades too soon, terrified of giving back a small gain. In short, he loses the very judgment upon which speculation depends. This downward spiral is born not from the market itself, but from the careless loss of capital. On the other hand, the man who preserves his capital holds the advantage of calm. He knows that no single trade will determine his fate. He can take losses without panic, because those losses are controlled and survivable. His ammunition remains plentiful, his confidence intact. When the right opportunity arises, he has the freedom to act boldly. Because he has preserved his capital, he has preserved his mind, and together they allow him to seize advantage when others are crippled by fear. Guarding capital also means recognizing that not every battle must be fought. The tape offers endless invitations to gamble fluctuations that seem to promise profit. Rallies that beckon, declines that tempt. The disciplined trader does not answer every call. He waits. He understands that to risk his ammunition on meaningless skirmishes is to weaken himself for the battles that truly matter. He lets the small moves pass, conserving his resources, so that when the great opportunity arises, he may strike with strength. His capital, preserved through patience, becomes a weapon of power. History proves this law without exception. Every fortune built in speculation was built upon the preservation of capital. The men who became legends were not those who risked everything recklessly, but those who protected their ammunition fiercely, refusing to allow one mistake to end their careers. They may have lost battles, but they kept their armies intact. They may have suffered setbacks, but they lived to fight again. In the long run, it was this ability to endure, not the brilliance of any single trade, that defined their success. Capital is more than numbers on a ledger. It is time itself. Each dollar preserved is another hour of freedom, another day of opportunity, another chance to wait for the moment. The man who loses his capital loses his time, his freedom, his chance. He is finished before he realizes the war has even begun. The man who guards his capital, on the other hand, guards his very life as a trader. He buys himself not only survival, but the priceless ability to continue playing the only game that matters. The next trade, the next opportunity, the next chance to turn judgment into profit. A soldier who wastes his ammunition may not even live to regret it. A trader who wastes his capital faces the same fate. The principle is eternal. Guard it as though it were your last breath. For without it, speculation ends, and with it ends the possibility of fortune. This truth is not glamorous, nor does it flatter ambition, but it is the foundation upon which all lasting success must stand. Those who forget it, no matter how skilled, brilliant, or lucky, will one day discover that without ammunition, there can be no victory. Speculation has always been a game of uncertainty, a contest where the only constant is risk. Men who step into the market often deceive themselves with illusions of control. They imagine that with enough study, with enough experience, or with enough confidence, they can eliminate risk entirely. But the market cannot be tamed. It punishes arrogance, it humbles the bold, and it always finds a way to remind every participant that nothing is guaranteed. The only true defense is not to eliminate risk, but to control it so tightly that no single trade has the power to destroy you. Out of this truth comes one of the most enduring principles of survival. Never risk more than a small fraction of total capital on any position. Whether that fraction is 1%, 2%, or some equally modest number, it is the 2% rule of survival. The logic behind it is brutally simple. If you risk too much on any single trade, sooner or later the market will take it from you. The market does not care how good you are, how many times you have been right, or how confident you feel. It will turn against you at the very moment you least expect it. When that happens, the size of your position determines whether you survive. A small, controlled risk means you live to fight again. An oversized risk means you are finished. It is not intelligence that separates survivors from casualties, but the discipline to obey this rule. Imagine a trader with $10,000 to his name. If he risks half his stake on one trade and loses, He is left crippled. He must now double his money just to return to where he started. A task far harder than the loss itself. If he risks the entire stake and loses, he is finished. There is no recovery, no second chance. But if he risks only 2%, $200, he can endure defeat without panic. He absorbs the loss, shrugs it off. 10 losing trades in a row, though painful, would still leave him with most of his ammunition intact. That is the power of the rule. It transforms disaster into mere inconvenience, final defeat into temporary setback. The danger of ignoring the rule is not only financial but psychological. When a trader risks too much, he binds his entire emotional state to the outcome of a single trade. Every tick against him feels like a dagger, every fluctuation a threat to his very survival. Fear and hope replace judgment. He cannot think clearly because he knows that being wrong means catastrophe. This fear drives him to break his own rules, to cut winners short, to cling desperately to losers, to act not from logic but from panic. In the end, the oversized risk destroys not only his account but his discipline, leaving him defenseless. By contrast, the trader who follows the 2% rule enjoys freedom of mind. He knows that no single trade can ruin him, so he approaches each decision calmly. Losses sting, but they do not cripple. Wins please him, but they do not intoxicate. He remains steady, able to judge the market with a clear eye because his very survival does not depend on being right this time. This clarity is more valuable than any single profit, for it preserves the trader's ability to act rationally across thousands of trades, rather than being broken by one. There is a deeper wisdom here that many never grasp. The 2% rule is not just a formula for managing money. It is a philosophy for managing ego. It forces a trader to admit that he is not infallible, that even his strongest conviction may be wrong. To risk only a small slice of capital is to acknowledge humility before the market. To recognize that survival matters more than brilliance. The reckless man seeks to prove himself right with size. The disciplined man seeks only to preserve his fortune, so that time will prove him right across the long run. This humility, baked into the rule, is why it endures. Many resist it because it feels too small. They dream of quick riches, of doubling their account in a handful of trades. Risking only a sliver seems tedious, slow, almost insulting to their ambition. But ambition without survival is suicide. The man who follows the rule may grow his fortune slowly, but he grows it surely. The man who ignores it may grow his fortune quickly, but he also destroys it just as quickly. Time reveals which approach wins. In speculation as in war, it is not the flash of a single battle that matters, but the ability to fight campaign after campaign, year after year. Another virtue of the 2% rule is that it makes recovery possible. Losses are inevitable. But recovery is only possible if those losses are limited. A man who loses half his stake must double it just to recover. A man who loses 90% must multiply what remains tenfold to break even. A near impossibility. But a man who risks 2% at a time never digs a hole so deep he cannot climb out. Even long streaks of bad luck cannot bury him. Eventually the tide will turn, and when it does, his preserved capital allows him to seize the opportunity. There is also compounding to consider. Small risks, when repeated with discipline, allow profits to accumulate steadily. Each gain, protected by the smallness of losses, adds to the trader's capital. As capital grows, what began as modest profits gradually swells into large ones, not through recklessness, but through patience. This is the quiet secret of great fortunes in speculation. They are not built on a single daring gamble. but on the disciplined repetition of small, controlled risks, allowed to compound over time. Skeptics often argue that rules like this are too rigid, that the market requires flexibility, that there are moments when conviction should justify larger risks. But history shows otherwise. Conviction has destroyed more traders than doubt ever did. A trader convinced of his own certainty is most vulnerable when the market proves him wrong. The 2% rule is a safeguard against conviction's danger. It ensures that even when the trader is most certain and therefore most exposed, his error cannot kill him. Discipline in speculation is not glamorous. It does not produce stories of overnight riches or daring gambles that win everything. What it produces is survival. And through survival, the possibility of long-term success. The 2% rule embodies this discipline in its purest form. It demands patience, humility, and restraint, qualities that most men lack. But for those who possess them, or who force themselves to learn them, the reward is endurance. They become survivors in a field where most are casualties. In the end, the 2% rule is more than mathematics. It is a philosophy of survival. It acknowledges that the market is stronger than any individual, that defeat is inevitable, and that the only true edge lies in living to fight another day. By risking no more than a small fraction of capital on any single trade, the disciplined trader ensures that no loss can destroy him, no mistake can end him, and no storm can sweep him from the field. He may suffer defeats, but he will never suffer annihilation. And in speculation, survival is victory enough. Men enter the market searching for formulas. They crave certainty, a set of rules or calculations that will guarantee profits, shield them from losses, and give them mastery over the chaos of speculation. They look for charts, ratios, signals, and systems, believing that if only they discover the right equation, the market will finally yield its secrets. But those who last long enough learn a harder truth. The formula is not in the numbers, but in the man himself. Numbers can be copied, systems can be borrowed, but temperament, discipline, patience, self-control, that cannot be faked, and it cannot be purchased. It must be cultivated. And it is temperament that determines whether any formula is obeyed or abandoned in the heat of battle. The greatest danger to a trader is not the market but his own nature. The market will always move, sometimes in his favor, sometimes against him. But it is his reaction that decides whether he survives. A formula may tell him to cut a loss, but his pride whispers to hold on, to wait for a rebound. A formula may tell him to let a profit run, but his fear urges him to snatch it before it disappears. A formula may tell him to risk only a small portion of his capital, but his greed insists that fortune favors the bold. In these moments, the numbers on the page are powerless. It is temperament alone that decides whether he follows his formula or betrays it. Temperament means the ability to obey rules when every instinct demands rebellion. It is easy to follow a formula when the market is calm, when the trade goes as expected, when profits flow smoothly. Anyone can be disciplined in fair weather. But speculation is not fair weather. It is storms, reversals, shocks, and surprises. It is losses that come suddenly, and gains that vanish in an instant. In such conditions, only the man with iron temperament can stand firm. He does not abandon his discipline in the heat of the moment. He clings to it, not because he enjoys it, but because he knows it is the only lifeline that will preserve him. Consider two men with the same formula. Each risks 2% per trade. Each cuts losses quickly. Each rides winners patiently. On paper they are identical, but in practice one man obeys his formula and the other does not. The first sees his trade move against him, feels the sting of pride, yet still cuts it as the rule demands. The second feels the same sting but cannot bear to admit defeat. He holds on, hoping, praying, and in so doing, breaks his own system. One survives, the other perishes. The difference is not in the formula, for they both had the same. The difference is in temperament. Temperament also determines how a trader handles the long stretches of nothingness that fill the life of speculation. The market does not offer clear opportunities every day. Sometimes weeks pass without a single signal worth acting upon. The man without temperament grows restless. He grows bored, impatient. He forces trades where none exist, simply to feel alive, to escape the emptiness of waiting. These forced trades erode his capital and his confidence. The man with temperament, however, endures the silence. He waits, unmoving, conserving his capital, guarding his strength until the true opportunity arrives. His formula tells him when to act, but his temperament allows him to wait until then. Patience is one of the rarest qualities in the market. Men crave action. They crave the thrill of movement. They crave the feeling of control. But temperament teaches that inaction can be the highest form of discipline. To sit with idle hands while the market tempts and teases is torture to the undisciplined. But to the man of temperament, it is simply part of the game. He understands that not trading is also a decision, and often the wisest one. His temperament allows him to resist the pull of constant activity, and in that resistance lies his advantage. Another element of temperament is humility. A trader who believes he is invincible will always size too large, hold too long, and risk too much. His arrogance blinds him to danger. The man of temperament accepts his own fallibility. He knows he will be wrong often, perhaps even more often than he is right. This acceptance frees him from the need to prove himself correct in every trade. He does not cling to losers in the hope of saving face. He does not swell with pride when the market proves him right. He treats both outcomes as part of the game, and he moves forward without ego. Numbers cannot teach humility, but temperament can enforce it. Greed, too, is a test of temperament. Every trader knows the temptation to double down after a string of wins, to break his own rules because he feels untouchable. This is when many lose everything. The man without temperament mistakes good fortune for invincibility, and the market punishes him for it. The man of temperament resists. He knows that success breeds overconfidence, and overconfidence breeds ruin. He does not let recent victories lure him into abandoning his discipline. He remembers that the same formula that preserved him in times of loss must also guide him in times of gain. The most subtle test of temperament comes not in failure, but in success. Losses make discipline difficult, but wins make it even harder. The man who suffers a loss feels pain, and that pain may remind him of the need for rules. But the man who wins feels pleasure, and that pleasure deceives him into thinking he no longer needs restraint. Success breeds recklessness more often than failure does. It whispers that the rules are unnecessary, that the trader has finally mastered the market, that he can now dispense with discipline. In these moments, temperament alone stands between him and disaster. The man of temperament remains humble, remains disciplined, remains faithful to his formula, even as profits tempt him to abandon it. The search for numbers, for systems, for formulas is endless. Men write books, create algorithms, design charts, all in pursuit of certainty. Yet all these numbers collapse without temperament. A formula is like a weapon. It is only as effective as the man who wields it. In the hands of the undisciplined, even the sharpest weapon becomes useless, even dangerous. In the hands of the disciplined, even a modest formula can yield survival and success. The weapon does not matter nearly as much as the steadiness of the hand that holds it. Time proves this truth. Over years, formulas change, markets evolve. Systems that once worked stop working, and new ones are created. But temperament endures. The man who possesses it adapts, survives, and thrives. The man who lacks it searches endlessly for new numbers, new systems, new tricks, yet continues to fail because the flaw lies not in his tools, but in himself. In the long run, it is temperament that separates the survivors from the casualties. The builders of fortunes from the makers of excuses. The formula is not numbers, it is temperament. Numbers can show the way, but temperament is the force that walks the path. Numbers can suggest discipline, but temperament is the strength to endure it. Numbers can design a plan, but temperament is the will to follow it when fear, greed, and pride conspire to break it. This truth cannot be written on paper or calculated in percentages. It lives only in the heart of the trader, in his ability to master himself before he dares to master the market.